Yeah. Okay, Chevra, let's learn a little bit. We had started this Shaila on Friday, so I want to restart it together so that we're clear on it. Um, this Shaila deals with the obligation that heirs have in honoring the debts of the deceased parent. So the Shaila as it was presented is that our father had put forth 12 post-dated checks for charity, that every Rosh Chodesh there's a new check, okay, for 1,000 shekels. After 3 months, father passed away, and the question is, do we have to honor the remaining 9 checks? So Rav Sharaga says this. There are really 2 parts to this question. What is the status of a check? That was the first question that we asked, and we said that there's really 3 possibilities. And then the second question is, do children have to honor a pledge that a father made for tzedakah? Okay, now, so first of all, he says, Pashut hadavar lahalacha shel chekem ein din shel kesef shelo matzinu kesef shev shel levatel oso. Masha ein kein b'check sheyesh efsharus levatla. So when we started analyzing the status of a check, we talked about 3 different ways of looking at what a check is. On the one hand, you could look at it as a promissory note. You could look at it as cash. And then the third thing was sort of an instruction to the bank to pay someone, to give someone money from your account. So, and he had brought in a number of different opinions. He says, Harbe, what's what we saw, but Harbe poskim kosva delohavi kikesef manamish mikama sibos, chada mishum she'ef shalavalo. It can't be considered like real cash because you could always cancel a check, right? Which is what Rav Moshe had said. Va'od yesh harbe makomos shalom makablim shekim kitashlim. There are many businesses that will not accept checks as payment. The imkain muchach delohavi kesef mamish. And then there are other times when there's insufficient funds in the account to cover the check, in which case it's just a piece of paper. Some poskim write that a check is like, so therefore it can't be considered like real cash. Some poskim say that a check is like a promissory note. Because basically it is committing oneself to provide these funds on demand to the person who bears the check. The check shows manenu havi kishtar his chayvus, kaven shechayv l'shali medina the Hilchos de Malchus Adina ein sham sheherich bazeh, based on Dina de Malchus Dina, which upholds the validity of a check. Mishpat b'shem hagrishal Yashiv, the check mahani midin situmta ayin sham. Rav Yashiv also agrees that it is a standard that is agreed upon among all people that this is something that has the validity of a promissory note. Uli inyan halacha, but halacha lamaisa hela Rabbeinu Hagon a mechaber shlita, the check avi kishtar hara la bank ba'alma. That really Rav Sharaga is of the opinion that a check is really a writ of evidence to the bank. Vahavi afilu pachos mishtar his chayvus v'kol shekein delavi kesef mamish. He feels it's not even as powerful as a promissory note, and certainly does not have the power of cash. V'chein kosav b'sefer nesiv Yosha shekein shama b'shem hagon Rav Abashol Zatzal v'chein shman merabenu Hagon shlita sheshamakin me'agon Rav Abashol shama shechekavi kamo petek ba'alma. He felt that it's just like a petek, it's like a note. V'chein kosav b'shut shalos shuva shevet halevi that Rav Osner also writes this. He says, "Rak mora lebank al yidei hachek lifro me'asikum sheish lo kvar b'cheshbon." It's really a writ of instruction to the bank that pay the bearer of this check this and this amount from my account. V'im kain eno nikam l'makabel l'chol l'hadeos rak midin ma'imad shloshin v'chuli ayin sham, and therefore it's not like it's not as if the creditor is holding on to the cash of the debtor by holding the check. In other words, it has less potency than an IOU. V'chein kosov b'shari mishpat b'shem hagrach Kanievsky shlita she'ein ha'chek nashav keklum ela kepisat ni'ar ayin sham. So you basically have two ways of looking at a check. Some look at it as a bona fide promissory note with all the rights of collection, as if the money's in your pocket. And some say no, that it's just a writ of instruction to the bank. And a person can always cancel the writ of instruction. He can always basically tell the bank, there's a guy who's going to be coming in with a check of mine. I want to cancel that check. Okay. Correct. A certified check, you don't have I don't think you're allowed to cancel, are you? Yeah.
I mean, money is actually set aside for you.
Yeah.
You give the check back to them. Yes. So this is
You never gave it to
them. And I never give it to him, you can get returned to the bank.
Right, because you never gave it to the recipient, but I think they set aside the
Yeah,
funds,
they take the money away from
so
you.
it's no longer even, so it's actually what
Right.
they said here.
Yeah.
Money has been set aside.
Well, look, as it's relevant for our discussion, the person has passed away, the person who wrote the check. So I do feel there would be a difference between a certified check and a regular check. A regular check, if we say that it's not even it doesn't even have the potency of a promissory note, so there, and it's just a writ of instruction to the bank, the heirs, it would seem, would have a legal right to cancel it, to cancel those instructions. So he writes as follows: Ulafizeh im nomar shecheku kamo shekosev petek lebank. It's basically giving an instruction to the bank. Imate bal hachek lo yia makabel rashai liftos ulahotzi es hachek. So if the writer of the check passes away, then the recipient does not have a right to even cash the check. The me'olam lo kibel rishus lagabos mos mehayorshim elarak min ha'av bilvad. Because it would seem, says Reb Sharaga, the person who wrote the check, it's implicit that he was only giving you the rights to go and collect from his bank account while he was still alive, because it was basically his instruction to the bank: give this fellow the money that I enumerate in this note. It's like a note to the bank. Give this fellow X number of dollars. But it's not his money anymore. Once he passes away, it's now the heir's money. The gam lefi chuke hamedina imeis notein hachek ein mekabel hachek yachol lagabos mehayorshim came de bimisaso but lahora'asa. Now this is true, he says, according to the rules of the state. And I don't know what the rules are in Israel, but
Tell the bank the drawer of the check that the account holder has died probably should not carry.
I think they freeze the accounts.
That goes and vests in trustees. And now it's a question of who comes first in the estate payments. There's other debts also.
right.
Also, maybe they pay the other debts first. There's no money in the account anyway to pay this check.
Right.
I don't think the bank should
Well,
cash.
let's say there's deep funds in the account. Would a bank, once they discover that a person has passed, would they no longer cash any of the checks?
They're not supposed to.
They're not supposed to.
They're not.
I think
They told the bank that the fellow died, and then they shouldn't do it.
I think they just
might be
freeze the
liable
accounts.
themselves.
Isn't a certified check like cash? I always thought
What's
it
the
was.
question? What are you asking, Izzy?
I always thought that certified check was like cash.
Certified check. Yeah, but we're talking about a regular personal check.
Oh.
Okay.
the business check, the business still open.
Yeah, the corporation can't.
Corporation
die.
check.
Right, if it's a corporate check,
Yeah.
yeah. So a corporate check might be different, Marv, huh? Because
Yeah.
just if
Yeah,
if one of the partners dies, the company is still alive. Yeah.
Even though the owner dies,
Yeah.
if there's an owner that dies, now that
Is it a corporation
now
or is it
the,
just
the wife that they take over or whatever.
That's internal to what the corporation.
Is it a sole proprietorship?
Nobody knows that, but, you know, if,
Yeah, well, Ron is talking about a mom and pop
Yeah.
operation, you
Sole
know.
proprietorship
Yeah.
versus a
you
corporation.
never know what's
But that's the advantage of corporation, it's an independent entity.
Right.
an incorporated entity, it doesn't die when the
Good,
owner,
good.
a shareholder. or
Yeah,
owner dies.
If it's just a partnership or a proprietorship, sole proprietorship, that might be different than a
Yeah,
corporation.
it's really incorporated. You know, like a non-incorporated business, it's just mom and dad.
Right,
And it's
then
mom and dad, but if it's a joint account, one of the account
Oh.
holders dies,
that's true.
then all the money vests and the legal title to the money vests in the survivor.
Uh-huh, okay, so joint account, Marv is saying, is that if one of the members of that joint account passes away, the account is still alive and kicking. But the question then becomes, if the decedent, like if Yaakov and Rachel, right, have a joint account, Yaakov passes away, but it's his signature on the check, maybe the bank shouldn't honor it because it's Yaakov's instruction, not Rachel's instruction.
Yeah, but your account, don't you have both sign authority?
In the world, you might have it, but we don't know. Anyway, the bank is told that an account holder dies, it probably, unless it's, whatever, jointly with a medical, but, probably shouldn't cash the check. If they do, what do you think?
But it's probably not the first thing that happens. The bank can it's probably some time from the when the person passes away till they're informed.
In the executor's like manual and stuff like that, they're told as soon as you hear that the person dies, you're supposed to tell the bank, tell everybody else,
Right.
notify everybody, creditors and person.
I'm responsible if they cash a check up to the top.
Okay,
Can't bank on
Vishamati. So Rav Sharaga says, I have heard, sheyesh mi sheratza lechalek bein shekem shehigia zmanam b'chaye ha'av, lebein shekem shelo higia zmanam b'chayav. He says, I have heard someone suggest that there would be a difference between a check that the date on the check is before the guy passes away versus the post-dated check where the check is only cashable after the person has passed away. The check im shehigia zmanam b'chaye ha'av chal al ha'av choivas haguf leporam va'af habonim chayavim lifroa chov avihim. If a check was good before the fellow died, right? And so then it's basically it's a promissory note. It's a commitment of a debt. And therefore, if the father didn't have a chance to have this, if the check wasn't cashed before the fellow died, the children have an obligation to honor the check. Aval chekem shelo higia zmanam b'chaye ha'av ein kan shibud haguf ve'ein hayoshim tzrichim lefroa me'ikar hadin. But any check that has not matured, the date has not arrived yet, and then the man died, and then only afterwards is it dated. So then there's bichlal no commitment, and the Yarshim do not have to pay that debt. And he's quoting Rav Vosner in Shevet HaLevi, which he says on the bottom. And he then brings something that what Rav Stern had questioned on the Shevet HaLevi. The gam kishetarich shel hachek meuchar sof sof amay lo nemed dahavi kishar shtar chob da'alma she'af shetarichu la'achar zman mikol makom chalosis chayvusa cholamei achshav ayin sham hashekasav b'zeh. He asks the question, Rav Stern. I think it's maybe the same Rav Stern of the Imrei Yaakov. He asks the question. He says, I don't understand. He says, even if it's a post-dated check, when you post-date a promissory note, the debt still begins from the time that the note was written. It's just that it's not collectible until the time of the date on the promissory note. So if you're going to view a check as a promissory note, then why don't we say that the debt is still there, even though it's not collectible until after the fellow has died? Ubesof hisik the kevin shechek habirak kinesinos rishus lamakabel lakachas chesed mecheshbono, and his conclusion is that it's because a check is not like a promissory note exactly. It really is just an instruction to the bank, pay the bearer X number of dollars. And therefore, yesh lomer she'ein litzdaka lakachas la'achar sha'anosin niftar, because of the hamotzi mechavero olav haraya ayin sham. And therefore, the charity does not have a right to go and collect that on that note, on that check, because since it's really something that's in doubt, we would say hamotzi mechavero olav haraya, that whoever you like, it's a suffix. Whether a check has the status of a bona fide shtarcho, of a promissory note, or whether it has the status of just an instruction to the bank to pay the bearer, is not clear, according to Reb Stern, and he concludes, therefore, that hamotzi mechaver olav haraya. The check should stay with the estate, and anyone who wishes to extract it has to bring absolute proof that this money should be paid out to them. Anyway, we'll go back up and continue this discussion. So, he says, and however, he says, afilu imin hadin efshel l'chayves hayorshim l'shalim et kol hachekim. So he says, so first of all, I know that Rav Vosner is of the opinion, if the check's date is precedes the death, then it is okay for the charity to go and collect on that check. Now, what would be the law in today's world if the check's date preceded the death? The bank using it would be okay. Okay. So he says, "Afilu min hadin ef shel chayvetz hayorshim l'shalim et kol hachekim, mikol makom yesh kan mitzvah l'kayim divrei hames." He says, even if we don't look at a check as a promissory note, and therefore the bank, the charity has no right to collect on checks that are post-dated, but there's another issue. And that issue is mitzvah l'kayim divrei hames. It is a mitzvah to fulfill the wishes of a decedent. In other words, if we knew that our father had expressed his wish that some of his estate go towards a certain charity, even though perhaps the mechanism of making that gift is not valid, the heirs still have a mitzvah to fulfill the wishes of the testator. Okay? Ve'afal pi shahames lo tziva liyorshav b'mefurash loses kach v'kach litzdaka. And he says we go even further. Even if the testator never actually expressly said to the heirs, I want you to give such and such amount to a charity, mikol makom yeshna kan hoichacha mefurashes shezer ritzono. But we have proof that his wish was that this charity over the course of a year should get 12,000 shekels from his estate. Shaharehu kasav umasar es hachekim ve'in gemiras das gedoyla mizu. He says, because after all, he wrote and gave the charity these post-dated checks, and therefore there's no greater demonstration of his wish than that. Below gora mi machshava b'leiv litzdaka shedarshu rabosenu kol nadiv leiv olos. And it's certainly not any worse than a person's pledge that he makes in his heart. And our rabbis tell us that even if you make a pledge in your heart, you have an obligation to honor that pledge. Because tzedakah is like hekdesh, and kol nediv leiv olos, that even the things that you pledge in your heart, if they're for sacrificial purposes, have to be delivered. So
institution that probably knows the money is coming to them, and now all of a sudden it's stopped. It's tainting a little bit. Person who passed away.
Well, it does. Well, I don't know if that I could say that it taints the decedent, but it certainly makes unless you want to say that, on a spiritual level, he thought that he was giving a certain amount for charity, and his station in heaven would be commensurate to that gift, and you're sort of taking away that mitzvah from him post mortem. Maybe that's what you mean, that it taints him in some way. But I don't think it taints his reputation, because everyone would understand that it's the heirs who have made that call, not him. But that's the point. The point is that if you know that this was the wish of the father, you do have a mitzvah to honor the wishes of the father. Especially, and by the way, there's a machlokas as far as how far this principle of mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis, that it's a mitzvah to fulfill the wishes of the decedent. There are some poskim who say that it only applies to how you deal with his estate that he left. But let's say the father, before on his deathbed, he said, I want you to make up with your brother. All right. So as you say, mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis, does it extend to that? Like, am I mechuyev? Well, it's always good to make up with your brother. I'm just using that as an example. But does the idea of mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis extend to matters beyond just how you should deal with his financial estate? So that's a machlokas. But certainly when it comes to his assets, there is a mitzvah to fulfill the wishes of the decedent. So now he says, regarding this idea of mitzvah l'kayim divrei hameis, let's see what he writes in the footnote. He says, Omnam ayin b'shevet halevi sham, shekasav de benosan litzdaka chekim duchuyim zenechshav kamo shavrak nader litain tzedaka. Uv'ichrei gavna ein alabona mitzvah l'kayim nidrei avihim kamo shekasav harama. Now the Rama writes that there is no obligation to fulfill the tzedakah pledges of a father. The alkein poter sham es habonim, and it's on that basis that Rav Vosner, because he looks at a check as really just an instruction to the bank, it's really just a pledge, and it's on that basis he exempts the children. The cost of the rak mividas chasidus yesh lahem l'shalim lahol l'nishmas ha'av ad kan tochen bar. And he says that you can't even really say that this is the wishes of the father, because we'll take a look at that Ramah maybe in Mirz Hashem tomorrow when we have a little bit more time. But he says that there's it's considered an act of piety, like I think, Ron, what you were alluding to bring merit to the neshama of the deceased, so that he has that extra zuchus of tzedakah to his merit. Amnam b'das Rabbeinu shlita yesh lomar al pi mashakasav hasmasham ve'im ha'av nasan es mashenadar la'acher kedei l'kayim nidro. That it's not just that the Sma writes in his commentary to the Shulchan Aruch that if a testator, he not only makes a pledge, he had not only made a pledge to tzedakah, but he gave a note he filled out a piece of paper saying, I hereby pledge such and such amount to tzedakah. Az yesh alabana mitzvah l'kayim mashenadar keyuyun sham. He says then, even the Rama would agree that the heirs have an obligation to honor their father's wishes. So he says, and therefore, the argument would go like this. It's true, if it was just a verbal pledge, the heirs could actually find a way to absolve themselves from honoring the tzedakah pledge. But if the father actually wrote a check, that demonstrates that it's more than just a verbal pledge. Then certainly the children have a mitzvah to fulfill the pledge, Ella de Hashevet Halevi l'shitaso the Einze begeder nasan lahem keven shachek dochoy velo roi legavia. But Rav Wosner has very little stock, places very little stock in the writing of a check. As we've seen above, he feels that writing a check is not a promissory note, and it's really just a piece of paper giving instructions to the bank. So therefore, it's not something that is collectible until the date arrives, and by that time, the fellow has already passed, and he's no longer in control of his assets. He no longer can tell the bank what to do. ולפי מה שכספתי, יש לומר דסוף סוף, כיוון שנשא להם צ'קים דחויים שעשיתם לגבס בזמן ואין מעכב בידם, שפיר הבי בגדר נשא, ויש מצווה לבנו מקיים נדרי האב. But he says, but that's sort of like the controversy. Since the father has written checks and he's given it to the charity, maybe that's tantamount to expressing his pledge in writing. And that's like that's where the halacha of the Sma would come in, that the charity, that the children do have an obligation to honor their father's wishes. Okay.
Rabbi.
Yes. Sure.
Yep. Morning. What happens if it's like a pre-authorized situation where every month the bank automatically, there's no checks involved, it's just an automatic withdrawal from the bank, and it goes on and on and on.
Right. Well, it would seem that any kind of automatic authorization probably stops as soon as the fellow passes away, right? Because it's implicit that what he's doing is he's authorizing the bank, take such and such amount from my account and give it like to the mortgage company, or give it, what happens, Marvin, if a person has set up an auto pay, like I do with my mortgage company and my automobile, leasing company. When the person passes away, do those companies continue drawing from the account automatically, or? Right. Marvin says that as soon as the bank discovers the person has died, they have an obligation to stop and I guess check in with the executors of the estate.
Some jurisdictions, like I saw something about this United States, they require probate. So until probate is done, it's in hold mode anyway.
It's in limbo, right?
I don't know.
And it doesn't give the bank a right to foreclose on a home, though, does it?
No, but sometimes the owners-
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as a person dies, you gotta tell them. Then we might have to fight over one or two things.
All right. We'll hold it here for today. Have a great day, everybody.